Hi, my name is Yulia, and this is the News Brief. Hopefully you're excited to see me again. Here we catch up with several news stories twice a week that I consider to be the most impactful to today. Then we discuss them in the comments, so you don't have to suffer alone, and I don't have to suffer alone. And of course, please give me your questions, suggestions, and constructive criticism because it helps me tailor next episodes. Let's get it. A couple of episodes ago, we've divided this brief into 3 different sections, and the first section is going to be Ukrainian axis. Unfortunately, the news that we're starting with today is not positive by any means, and I mean, if you might have noticed, every time we start the briefs, it starts with Ukraine, and of course it starts with shelling, or it starts with bombing, or it starts with a drone strike or a missile hitting something. So this time, it's a particularly awful one, and it reminded me of something that happened in Lviv a couple of months ago, because Russia killed yet another family. On November 11th, a Russian missile attack on Kryvyi Rih killed almost the entire Gulag family, leaving only the father, Maxim, as the sole survivor, according to regional governor Serhiy Lysak. Maxim tragically lost his wife, Olena, and their 3 children, who were found under the rubble of their home. Their eldest son, Kyrylo, was 10 years old. Dmytro was almost 3, and their youngest daughter, Ulyana, was just 2 months old. The Gulag family was well regarded for their kindness and active involvement in the community. Friends and neighbors remembered Olena and Maxim for their compassion, as they often prepared meals for the homeless, visited orphanages, and participated in charity work. Rescue operations at the site have been completed. In total, 4 people were killed and 14 were injured in the Russian missile strike on the civilian building. I don't know if you remember this one, but an almost exactly the same story happened in Lviv, where only the father survived and the mom and their 3 daughters died. And this is a very similar story. The father survived and the mom and their 3 children died in a missile strike. If this isn't genocide, I don't know what is. Russia is killing entire families. A video showing the explosion of the Tarnovska Dam at the Kurakhove reservoir has surfaced. According to TSN, water from the Kurakhove reservoir has been flowing into the Volcha River, moving towards the villages of Bohatyr, Andriivka, and Oleksiivka since yesterday. Authorities have stated there is no risk of flooding in Kurakhove, and residents in high-risk areas have been evacuated. Reports indicate that enemy armored vehicles breached the Kurakhove area but were destroyed by Ukrainian forces, with drones eliminating Russian infantry. Yesterday, Vadim Filashkin, head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, confirmed that Russian forces had damaged the dam. This strike poses a potential threat to residents along the Volcha River in both Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk region, Filashkin said. We've talked about it more in depth in the previous episodes. If you would like to find out what's been going on at the Kurakhove Dam, please go watch that one. Russia has conducted its first combined missile and drone strike on Kyiv in 73 days, according to the Kyiv City Military Administration. The attack, which lasted over 2 hours, involved air-launched cruise missiles, ballistic missiles such as the KN-23, KN-24, and Iskander-M, and various types of drones, including Shahed, Giran models. The Kyiv City Military Administration reported that the defense forces successfully intercepted and destroyed multiple cruise and ballistic missiles, as well as nearly a dozen enemy drones. There were no immediate reports of damage or casualties in Kyiv following the strike. I, for one, have overslept that entire ordeal and had no idea that something was happening in the middle of the night, which is rare. Usually you can tell because you can hear drones being intercepted. My dogs are usually barking. This time around, for some unknown to me reason, I actually slept really well. And on the one hand, that's actually very dangerous because you're supposed to react to air raid alarms, and on the other hand, it's good because I did get some sleep. And sleep these days in Ukraine, is something hard to find. The State Emergency Service later, however, reported that 1 person was injured following a morning rocket attack in the Kyiv region. The strike led to the destruction of a building and caused a fire in the Brovary district of the Kyiv region. Emergency services have been responding to the incident. So not completely casualty-free, but fatality-free. And that's as good as we can get. And on that note, we arrived to our international section called the Western Axis. And we're going to be talking about events all around the world. Rheinmetall, a German arms manufacturer, and the SAR satellite company ICEYE, which began collaborating to assist Ukraine in September, have reported initial success, as highlighted by Rheinmetall's press service. To meet Ukraine's demand for to meet Ukraine's demand for SAR satellite imaging, Rheinmetall and Ukraine signed a contract backed by the German government. This agreement extends the SAR data and support Ukraine has received from ICEYE throughout the conflict. Since early October, Ukraine has been receiving new satellite images from ICEYE's SAR synthetic aperture radar satellites under the collaboration. These images complement other intelligence data and aid the armed forces in decision-making and operational planning. The agreement grants access to the entire ICEYE satellite fleet. SAR satellites offer significant advantages over conventional ones, producing high-resolution images regardless of weather or time of day. They can capture detailed imagery, allowing identification of even small objects on the ground, providing armed forces with a critical edge in surveillance, reconnaissance, target acquisition, and battlefield positioning. Rheinmetall, headquartered in Düsseldorf, had announced its participation in the world's largest radar reconnaissance satellite fleet in June 2024. The company has also secured exclusive rights to sell SAR satellites to military and government clients in Germany and Hungary. These satellite images are incredibly important for the battlefield because they do help identify the enemy, they do help strategize, they help with a lot. And so this is by far one of the most important things that you can have in order to conduct warfare. And Russia recently started collaborating with Iran on satellites, and that's not good news because for Russians to find satellite images, it's not nearly as easy as it has been for us. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is set to urge U.S. President Joe Biden to release $20 billion of the $50 billion loan pledged by the G7 countries for Ukraine, according to The Telegraph. Starmer plans to raise the matter during the G20 summit in Brazil, aiming to secure the loan's disbursement, which would be repaid using profits from frozen Russian assets. The report also notes that Starmer intends to seek approval for Ukraine to conduct long-range strikes against Russia, emphasizing the need for continued and strengthened support before former President Donald Trump potentially returns to office. A lot of countries have been scrambling and trying to approve packages of support for Ukraine before Donald Trump gets into office because no one knows what he's going to do. There have been conflicting reports about him already. There were reports of him having a conversation with Putin, then there were reports of him not having a conversation with Putin. He has been saying that he's going to surrender Ukraine, then his admin has been releasing statements saying that he's actually going to stay with Ukraine and support Ukraine. Then there have been other admins saying that, they're going to be talking about some peace plan. So it's really no one knows what's going to happen. And I do understand and I do applaud and thank everyone in all of our allied countries for really trying to step up the support to make sure that Ukraine is covered at least through 2025. Norway's opposition Conservative Party has proposed a significant increase in aid to Ukraine for 2025, suggesting a rise from 15 billion NOK to 45 billion NOK, which is Norwegian kronas. This proposal aims to bolster Ukraine's defense capabilities amid the ongoing war. The plan also includes assistance for Ukraine's energy sector and the construction of military infrastructure such as shelters to protect F-16 fighter jets from potential Russian attacks. Meanwhile, speaking of Donald Trump that we did, one story ago, Donald Trump confirmed statements made by Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary for Russian President Vladimir Putin, indicating that reports from the Washington Post about a conversation between Trump and Putin were inaccurate. Trump shared a Fox News story on Truth Social that detailed his interactions with various world leaders following his election victory, clarifying that Putin was not among those he had spoken to. Well, he hasn't actually clarified that, nor did he say that he didn't speak to Putin. He just shared that picture, and there were world leaders like that on it. I mean, to be honest, he could have had a secret conversation with Putin. We know that they're no strangers to talking to each other. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that that was necessarily a clarification. The EU is planning to boost its defense and security expenditures by billions of euros, as reported by Financial Times. The 2021/2027 EU budget, which allocates 392 billion euros aimed at reducing economic disparities, has seen less than 5% of this funding utilized in recent years. Journalists indicate that in the coming weeks, EU member states will be permitted to use funds from this budget to bolster the defense sector, marking a significant shift in how these resources can be applied to support security and military initiatives. Which is, of course, great for the EU. We always talk about the fact that the EU needs to step up and the EU needs to enter the wartime economy because, in reality, if we think about America, for America, it's geopolitics. for EU, this is very real and it's a very real threat. Poland's Chief of the General Staff, Wiesław Kukula, has called for preparations for a potential conflict with Russia, according to Rzeczpospolita. He emphasized that the threat is genuine, stating whether and when the war will actually break out, in a certain sense, depends on us. An attack on a country that is well prepared for defense and whose society will resist is a huge risk. Kukula highlighted that Russia possesses significant demographic resources, natural reserves, and a capable industry, enabling it to not only sustain warfare, but also to enhance its defense capabilities. He pointed out that Moscow might see an opportunity for aggression if the US becomes embroiled in a conflict in the Pacific or if NATO's unity weakens. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte emphasized the importance of continued support for Ukraine and strengthening transatlantic unity in an address directed at the incoming US administration ahead of discussions with French President Emmanuel Macron, according to Reuters. Rutte highlighted the need to escalate measures against Russian aggression and called for increased assistance to Ukraine to shift the conflict's course. He pointed out the potential threats posed by military aid from North Korea and Iran to Russia, adding, China supports Russia's economy, enhances its defense industry, and bolsters its global narrative. The alliance between Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China endangers not only Europe, but also peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific and North America. French President Macron echoed Rutte's sentiments, affirming France's commitment to supporting Ukraine for as long as necessary. Macron stated, "This is the only path to meaningful negotiations, and it must be clear that nothing should be decided regarding Ukraine without Ukrainians, and no decisions about Europe should be made without Europeans." It is very evident to me that absolutely every single one of the world leaders is freaking out, and everyone is trying to do their best in order to secure Europe's safety with the incoming Trump administration. And I'm not saying, again, I'm trying to stay unbiased here because you all know my personal preferences, but what I am trying to explain here is that every leader in the EU does not know what's to come, because if the plan was very evident with Kamala, it is really not evident with Trump, and his different advisors and different ministers and different people from his administration are saying very different things. There is clearly no unity. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has suggested that if Donald Trump reduces US support to Kyiv, Britain might need to consider sending ground troops to Ukraine. Oh, hi Bojo, I've missed you. Johnson emphasized that the fall of Ukraine would result in heightened threats along European borders, with democracies directly confronting Russia. He argued that stronger commitments from European nations may be required to maintain regional security and counter potential aggression. I mean, it sounds very nice, and I do agree with him, but at the same time, I don't think that any NATO country is going to be sending its troops to Ukraine, literally at any point. Friedrich Merz, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, has declared that if he becomes chancellor, he will issue an ultimatum concerning Ukraine. Merz stated he would demand that Vladimir Putin end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. If his demand is not met, Germany would begin supplying Ukraine with Taurus long-range missiles and permit their use for strikes on Russian territory. While this rhetoric sounds really good, and I would love for that to happen, I have spoken to some of my German friends, and they did tell me that this particular candidate, if you don't know anything about German politics, like I didn't know much until now, they told me that this particular candidate will literally say anything to get elected, and that his words are kind of like, empty promises and just water flowing. So I wouldn't get too excited, though. When I read that statement, I was very excited. I was like, oh wow, what an antidote to Scholz. France has announced it will send 6 Mirage 2005F multipurpose fighters to Ukraine at the start of 2025, doubling the initial plan of 3 fighters. Additionally, by the end of 2024, France is set to deliver a total of 600 AASM precision-guided bombs to Ukraine. To support this, the French Ministry of Defense will boost production with the target of manufacturing 1,200 AASM bombs by 2025, ensuring Ukraine's munitions supplies are maintained and replenished. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken stated that President Joe Biden's administration will provide military assistance to Ukraine at a level that will enable the armed forces to sustain combat operations through 2025. This announcement followed Blinken's meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Brussels, as reported by Reuters. Blinken emphasized President Biden's commitment to continue reinforcing NATO and supporting Ukraine, highlighting that every day of his administration will be used to maintain and enhance this effort. Additionally, Blinken warned that any deployment of North Korean troops in support of Russia's war effort in Ukraine would be met with a decisive response. So this is important, and I do hope that they do hold their word and that Biden administration for the next, less than 60 days, or a little more than 60 days, takes it very seriously and helps Ukraine and generally does put provisions in place for Ukraine to be okay throughout 2025. Because I think they don't understand what's going to happen worldwide if Ukraine isn't okay. And I think it's incredibly important for them to make sure that if Trump so wishes not to support Ukraine, there is a rollover from their administration that does help us. And of course, when they say a decisive response, I don't necessarily believe them because, well, they've said that so many times and then didn't respond to anything. Which brings me to our favorite section, From Russia with Hate, or the Russian Axis. And of course, it's always, Russia's always a shit show. This time, somehow, it's actually a very stable shit show. So there's that. Russia is deploying increasing numbers of infantry units into battle, disregarding the casualties. Daily reports of killed and wounded exceed 1,000 soldiers. As I said, very typically Russian. And with that, all of those casualties, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has approved new compensation rules for wounded soldiers participating in the war in Ukraine. Under the new conditions, a significant part of the injured soldiers will receive reduced payments. Aw, sad. Or is it? Maybe don't come invade another country. Lisbon hosted a web summit that brought together representatives of the world's largest technology companies. Among the speakers was Yulia Navalnaya, whose speech was interrupted by Ukrainians. They simply asked her if she supported the war, because clearly she's been asked this question many times before, and she always struggles to answer with anything that isn't a veiled yes. Admiral Rob Bauer, the head of NATO's military committee, expressed that if Russia did not possess nuclear weapons, Western leaders might have already deployed troops to assist Ukraine in the ongoing war. He pointed out the significant difference between past conflicts, such as the fight against the Taliban in Afghanistan and the current situation in Ukraine, noting that nuclear capabilities fundamentally alter the calculus. The Taliban did not have nuclear weapons. The Russians do. But again, I'm not saying it's impossible. However, we as an alliance see this risk, and the potential discussion is needed. Are we ready for such a risk? Bauer explained, underscoring the need for NATO to consider and debate the potential implications of direct military involvement given the nuclear threat posed by Russia. It's an interesting statement for him to make because what that does, it only emboldens other countries to start procuring nuclear weapons and producing nuclear weapons. Because what he just said is if you have nukes, everything goes. And I mean, I know what he was trying to do with this article. I just don't think that in the current geopolitical climate in the world, it's a reasonable thing to be airing out like that. In Moscow, the Gulag History Museum was closed down, allegedly due to violation of fire safety regulations. Founded in 2001, the museum was dedicated to the memory of the victims of repression in the USSR. I bet you it's not the fire safety regulations. It's functioned for 24 or 23 years and it's been okay, and suddenly there's fire safety regulations. Also, since when does Russia care about fire safety? I think it's closed because Russia does not want their people to know their actual history of repressions. Not that I would think that a museum in Russia would portray it accurately anyway. But this is just part of rewriting the history, and Russia does it all the time. And on that note, that's all I have for you for today, and thank you for watching. If you like this video, please do like it. Please send it to a friend because you never know who might like it as well. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to The Gaze so you can see my pretty face more often. And maybe you want to turn on the notifications. And of course, if you would like to leave a comment with your questions, suggestions, reviews, constructive criticism, I read all of it, and I absolutely love when you do it. See you next time.